The entrance to the Crystal Aurora Gala shimmered like a dream carved out of glass and gold. Camera flashes exploded across the red carpet as the world's most powerful celebrities stepped out of black luxury cars, each smile carefully curated. When Leonardo DiCaprio arrived, the energies shifted instantly. Reporters leaned forward, photographers shouted his name, and fans pressed against barriers. Leo smiled politely, adjusted his tuxedo, and waved, his public image flawless as ever. Known not just as a Hollywood legend but as a fierce environmental activist, he was the star of the night. The gala itself was dedicated to climate conservation, a cause Leo had championed for decades. Inside the grand hall, crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors while a live orchestra played softly. Everything felt controlled, elegant, untouchable. But beneath that perfection, something dark was already moving. Just minutes after Leo entered the venue, phones began vibrating across the room. At first, it was subtle, assistants glancing down, publicists whispering urgently to one another. Then the expressions changed. Brows furrowed. Smiles faded. A senior PR manager rushed toward a corner, scrolling rapidly, her face draining of color. Screens lit up with the same headline over and over again. Asterisk, breaking. Leonardo DiCaprio linked to offshore investment tied to environmental destruction. Asterisk, the accusation spread like wildfire. Alleged screenshots showed financial records pointing to Leo's name, connected to a company accused of funding deforestation projects overseas. The irony was brutal. Social media exploded with outrage, disbelief, and mockery. Within minutes, Leo's name was trending worldwide, but not for the reason anyone expected tonight. Leo was pulled aside near a private balcony overlooking the city skyline. His assistant handed him a phone, hands trembling. As Leo scrolled, his calm expression tightened, not with fear, but with shock. He knew the accusation was false, yet he also knew how Hollywood worked. Truth often came second to perception. Across the room, some guests began avoiding eye contact. Sponsors whispered to board members. A powerful donor suggested that Leo should quietly leave the event until things settled. The orchestra continued playing, but the atmosphere had shifted. The gala no longer felt like a celebration, it felt like a courtroom without a judge. Years of advocacy, millions raised for environmental causes, and a reputation built on integrity were suddenly hanging by a thread. From a far side of the hall, Keanu Reeves watched everything unfold in silence. Unlike most attendees, he wasn't surrounded by cameras or assistants. He stood near a pillar, holding a simple glass of water, dressed modestly compared to the extravagance around him. Keanu noticed what others missed: the unnatural speed of the scandal, the coordinated whispers, the way certain people seemed almost prepared for this moment. He had seen this pattern before. Hollywood didn't just create stars, it destroyed them too, often with precision. As Leo stood alone on the balcony, framed against the city lights, Keanu felt something deeper than sympathy. He recognized injustice. And in that moment, while the world sharpened its knives and waited for Leo to fall, Keanu Reeves made a quiet decision. He would not let this lie win. This night, meant to honor hope and the future, was about to become the beginning of a very different story. Keanu Reeves didn't rush toward Leonardo DiCaprio the way publicists and assistants had. He waited. He watched the pattern of movement in the room, the clusters of whispering executives, the way certain donors suddenly seemed distant, the reporters hovering just outside the glass doors, sensing blood in the water. When Keanu finally moved, it was with the same quiet certainty that defined him. He found Leo standing near the balcony, the city glowing behind him like a million indifferent stars. Keanu didn't open with sympathy or questions. He simply said, "This feels engineered." Leo looked up, surprised, not by the words, but by the tone. There was no panic in Keanu's voice, no need to impress. Just calm, grounded clarity. In a room full of people trying to protect themselves, Keanu was the first person who seemed focused on the truth. Leo exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. He admitted what he hadn't said out loud yet, that the accusation made no sense, that every investment he touched was audited repeatedly. But logic didn't matter once a narrative took hold. Keanu nodded. He explained that years earlier, he'd seen similar tactics used against filmmakers and activists who challenged powerful financial interests. Shell companies, doctored screenshots, Timed leaks released during high-profile public appearances. They want you reacting, Keanu said quietly. Apologizing. Retreating. That's how they locked the story. Leo's eyes narrowed as realization set in. This wasn't random chaos, it was strategy. And whoever planned it knew exactly when and where to strike. Instead of advising silence or a carefully worded apology, Keanu offered something unexpected: immediate action. He told Leo about a small circle of investigators and digital forensics experts he trusted. Not flashy firms, not Hollywood names, but people who worked quietly and thoroughly. Keanu had helped fund similar work in the past, never attaching his name. He stepped aside briefly, making a call, his voice low and controlled. When he returned, he said, "They're already looking. No contracts, no conditions, just help." Leo felt a shift inside him, relief mixed with disbelief. In an industry built on transactions, Keanu was offering loyalty without leverage. It wasn't heroic. It was human. As the gala continued in forced elegance, a second, invisible operation unfolded. In hotel rooms and quiet offices across the city, data began moving. Metadata from the leaked images was traced. Financial registries were cross-checked. IP addresses were flagged. Patterns emerged, connections to lobbying groups that had openly opposed Leo's environmental campaigns. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an attack on Leo's reputation. It was an attempt to discredit a movement. Keanu stayed off the grid, refusing interviews, ignoring messages from curious insiders. He sat with Leo in a quiet side room, not offering speeches, just presence. "We don't fight noise with noise," Keanu said. "We fight it with proof." By the end of the night, Leo was still trending, but now something had changed. Independent journalists began questioning the source of the leak. A few posts were quietly deleted. The certainty in the outrage softened into confusion. As guests left the gala, unaware of the battle being waged behind closed doors, Leo realized something profound. The scandal hadn't been stopped yet, but it had been contained. And the man who stepped in to help wasn't a strategist chasing headlines or a fixer chasing power. It was Keanu Reeves, standing beside him, steady, anonymous, and unshaken. For the first time since the accusation broke, Leo believed the truth would survive. And that belief made all the difference. Morning arrived without mercy. Before the sun fully climbed over the skyline, the story had already mutated a dozen times across news sites and social feeds. Overnight outrage had hardened into something more dangerous: assumption. Television panels debated Leonardo DiCaprio's fall from grace. Social media influencers dissected his past statements frame by frame, and sponsors quietly began reassessing contracts. Yet beneath the noise, something was shifting. Independent reporters noticed inconsistencies in the leaked screenshots. Mismatched fonts, altered timestamps, transaction formats that didn't align with standard offshore reporting. What had looked damning just hours earlier now carried faint cracks. These were details most people missed, but the investigators Keanu trusted did not. Inside a quiet office far from the gala's glamour, data analysts traced the digital fingerprints left behind by the leak. Metadata revealed that the images had been edited multiple times before release. File histories pointed to software commonly used by political lobbying firms, not financial institutions. IP addresses bounced through overseas servers, but the origin was closer than expected, linked to a media consulting group previously hired to counter environmental legislation. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't a mistake. It was a coordinated smear designed to collapse credibility before facts could catch up. Keanu listened as the findings came in, expression unchanged, while Leo absorbed each detail with growing clarity. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about exposure. By mid-morning, a quiet pivot began in the media landscape. A respected investigative journalist published a thread questioning the authenticity of the leak, carefully, methodically, without emotion. Another outlet followed, citing anonymous sources with direct access to the forensic review. The phrase, alleged evidence, started appearing where certainty once stood. Leo's legal and PR teams, now armed with verified documentation, moved quickly but precisely. They scheduled a press briefing, not defensive, not rushed. Leo refused to hide. When he entered the room, cameras clicked furiously. But the tone had changed. This wasn't a man cornered. This was a man prepared. Leo laid out the facts step by step. He explained his foundation's financial transparency protocols, then presented the forensic findings, side-by-side comparisons of real financial documents versus the manipulated images. He showed timelines, traced digital origins, and revealed connections to organizations that had openly opposed his work. The room fell silent. Questions shifted. Reporters stopped asking asterisk, "Why did you do this?" Asterisk and started asking asterisk, "Who did this to you?" Asterisk within minutes, alerts flashed across phones worldwide. Headlines flipped in real time. New evidence suggests Leonardo DiCaprio targeted in coordinated smear campaign. The narrative cracked, then collapsed. While Leo faced the cameras, Keanu remained invisible. He watched from a quiet distance, refusing credit, avoiding attention. This wasn't his victory to claim. It was the truth reclaiming its place. By afternoon, sponsors reversed their positions. Public support surged. Hashtags that once mocked now defended. The same internet that had rushed to judge now rushed to apologize. As the day closed, Leo stepped outside alone, the chaos finally behind him. Keanu joined him briefly, offering nothing more than a nod. No speeches, no celebration, just acknowledgement. The storm had passed, not because of outrage or power, but because truth had been given the space to speak. And in Hollywood, that kind of moment was rare enough to be unforgettable. The city felt different that night. The noise had faded, the urgency dissolved into exhaustion, leaving behind a strange calm that only followed survival. The gala hall was empty now, its chandeliers dimmed, chairs stacked, traces of champagne and celebration reduced to silence. Outside, the city lights reflected off the pavement as Leonardo DiCaprio stepped away from the building alone. The day had been relentless, interviews, legal briefings, calls from supporters and skeptics alike, but the weight that pressed on his chest earlier had finally loosened. Not disappeared, but shifted. He hadn't just defended his name, he had seen how quickly the world was willing to turn. That realization stayed with him as deeply as the relief. Keanu Reeves was seated a short distance away, on a low concrete ledge near the edge of the plaza, his jacket folded beside him. He looked more like someone waiting for a late bus than a Hollywood icon. Leo approached slowly, unsure how to begin. Gratitude felt inadequate compared to what had been at stake. "You didn't have to do any of this," Leo said at last, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. Keanu shrugged, eyes still on the street. "Someone did it to me once," he replied. "Not the same way, but I remember what it feels like when the story runs faster than the truth." Leo sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable, almost necessary. Leo admitted something he hadn't told anyone else. In the darkest moment, just before Keanu stepped in, he had been seconds away from releasing a public apology, not because he was guilty, but because he was afraid. Afraid that fighting would only make it worse. Keanu nodded, understanding instantly. "That's why these things work," he said. "They push good people into surrender." The words landed harder than any headline. Leo realized that what Keanu had given him wasn't just protection, it was perspective. A reminder that integrity sometimes meant standing still while chaos burned itself out. As they talked, Keanu never framed his actions as heroic. He spoke about responsibility, about using influence quietly, without turning it into currency. He warned Leo that the people behind the smear wouldn't disappear. They'd retreat, wait, and try again someday. But tonight had sent a message. Truth, when backed by patience and evidence, still had power. Leo listened, absorbing every word, feeling something shift inside him. This wasn't mentorship in the traditional sense. It was something rarer, peer-to-peer honesty in an industry built on masks. When they finally stood to leave, there were no cameras, no witnesses. Just two men walking in opposite directions under the city lights. Later, in private conversations, Leo would describe that night as the moment he truly understood why Keanu Reeves was respected across Hollywood. Not because of his films, his fame, or his fortune, but because when everything was on the line, Keanu chose to step forward quietly, without asking for recognition. The scandal would be remembered by the public as a headline that collapsed in a day. But for Leo, the lasting truth was far deeper. He had learned that in a world obsessed with noise, the strongest kind of integrity often spoke in a whisper. Weeks passed, and the scandal that once threatened to consume Leonardo DiCaprio slowly dissolved into the background noise of Hollywood's endless news cycle. What remained, however, was not relief, but resolve. Leo moved deliberately, choosing silence where others expected celebration. Then, without warning or fanfare, he announced a new global transparency initiative aimed at protecting activists, journalists, and public figures from coordinated smear campaigns. The announcement wasn't flashy. No dramatic press tour. No emotional confessions. Just facts, structure, and intent. The message was clear. This wasn't revenge, it was prevention. Insiders understood immediately that the initiative was a direct response to what had happened, a way to ensure that the same tactics used against him would fail against others. At the launch event, Leo stood before a modest audience of researchers, legal experts, and non-profit leaders. Cameras were present, but they weren't the focus. During his speech, Leo paused briefly, choosing his words carefully. "When truth is attacked," he said, "it survives only if someone is willing to stand beside it." He didn't mention names. He didn't need to. Those who knew, knew. Across the room, unnoticed by most, Keanu Reeves stood near the back, hands in his pockets, listening. He hadn't been invited as a guest of honor. He hadn't asked to be there. He simply showed up, quietly, as always. When applause filled the room, Keanu didn't clap loudly. He just nodded once, satisfied that the moment belonged to the work, not the people behind it. Hollywood responded in its own subtle way. Executives who once whispered now spoke carefully. Activists reached out privately, asking how Leo had navigated the storm. More than one powerful figure quietly admitted that they had underestimated him and misjudged Keanu Reeves entirely. The story that circulated wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about restraint. About how the loudest voice in the room didn't win. The most dangerous realization for those who orchestrated the smear wasn't that they had failed, it was that they had been exposed without spectacle. That kind of loss lingered. Months later, during a low-key interview, Leo was asked how he managed to stay composed while the world seemed ready to turn against him. He paused longer than usual. "I was reminded that integrity doesn't need defending if it's real," he said. "It just needs time and the right people beside you." The interviewer pushed, asking who he meant. Leo smiled slightly, then changed the subject. The camera cut away, but viewers noticed something in the background. Keanu Reeves passing through the studio hallway, unacknowledged, unintroduced, almost invisible. The moment lasted seconds, but fans caught it instantly. Screenshots spread. Speculation followed. And for once, the internet got it right. The legacy of that night wasn't the scandal itself, it was what followed. Leo continued his work with renewed focus, no longer naive about the cost of influence, but unwilling to retreat. Keanu returned to his life exactly as it had been before. No speeches, no claims, no credit. And that was the point. Hollywood would remember the story as another headline that came and went. But those who truly watched understood something deeper. When everything was on the line, one man chose noise, another chose truth, and history quietly chose its hero.